Deep in the Appalachian Mountains, there are places where the forest never forgets. Hikers whisper about screams that echo through caves, shadows that follow for miles, and faces that vanish the moment you look away. These are not campfire tales. They are real encounters told by those who swore they'd never go back. Tonight on Dark Untold, we uncover 9 of the most disturbing true horror stories from the Appalachian Trail. Stories so chilling, you'll question if you'd ever dare step foot on those paths again. They tell you, when you hike the Smokies alone, never stop if you hear footsteps behind you. Don't look back. Don't call out. Just keep moving. Because sometimes it isn't another hiker at all. My name is Aaron Miller, 38 years old, schoolteacher from Knoxville. I've been hiking these mountains since I was a boy. The Smokies are home to me fog-draped ridges, the smell of pine and damp earth, the quiet hum of cicadas at dusk. It's where I go to clear my head. That's why, in the fall of 2021, after a brutal year of teaching through the pandemic, I decided to take 3 days to hike a stretch of the Appalachian Trail that cuts through the Smokies. I needed the solitude, the silence. The morning I set out, the air was cool, the kind of crispness that wakes your lungs and sharpens your senses. The trail wound through towering oaks and firs, their leaves already beginning to turn. The scent of moss and wet leaves clung to the ground, and every now and then, the distant call of a crow echoed through the forest. I felt alive, eager, at peace. But peace doesn't last long in these mountains. About 5 miles in, I noticed something odd. The trail was empty, yet I kept hearing faint footsteps behind me. At first, I brushed it off, probably just the echo of my own boots on the packed earth. But the rhythm was off. My strides were steady, but the sound behind me faltered, stopped, then resumed. Like someone was pausing, letting me move ahead, then catching up again. I stopped suddenly and turned. The trail stretched back, silent and empty, lined with trees that seemed to lean closer the deeper you looked. No one was there. I shook it off, adjusted my pack, and kept moving. But from that moment on, the woods didn't feel the same. The silence was thicker, heavier, pressing down on me. The usual chatter of birds was gone, as though even they were watching, waiting. By late afternoon, I reached a clearing where I planned to set up camp. The grass was damp, the smell of wet soil rising as I unpacked my gear. I had just finished pitching my tent when I felt that prickling sensation, the one you get when someone is standing behind you, watching. I turned, and I saw him. At first, I thought he was just another hiker. Tall, lean, wearing old clothes that looked out of place-faded trousers, a threadbare jacket, boots that looked like they belonged in another century. He stood perfectly still at the edge of the clearing, half shrouded by trees. My relief at seeing another person vanished the moment I noticed his face. His eyes, or rather, the absence of them. Where his eyes should have been were 2 deep, hollow sockets. Black, empty, bottomless, like tunnels into the earth. Shadows seemed to writhe inside them, shifting with the dim light. My chest went cold. "Hey," I shouted, my voice cracking. "You okay?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, head slightly tilted, those hollow eyes fixed on me. I grabbed the handle of my flashlight, my fingers slick with sweat, though the air was cool. I blinked, and he was gone. Just gone. The trees swayed with the wind, but the space where he stood was empty. I backed toward my tent, my breath shallow, every instinct screaming at me to run. But where? The nearest trailhead was miles away. Night was falling, and the Smokies at night are a labyrinth. I forced myself to stay put, zipped myself into the tent, and sat there in the dark, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. Sleep never came. Every time my eyes drifted shut, I heard them, the footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the tent. Leaves crunching softly, twigs snapping under weight. I held my breath, praying it was an animal. But deep down, I knew better. At one point, I swore I heard whispering. Low, guttural, words I couldn't understand, like an old dialect carried on the breeze. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound wasn't outside. It was inside my head, curling into my thoughts like smoke. When dawn finally broke, I stumbled out of the tent, hollow-eyed myself from lack of sleep. The clearing looked ordinary, but the feeling of being watched hadn't left. I packed up quickly, eager to get back on the trail. For hours I hiked. The forest was darker than it should have been, shadows stretching long across the path. I kept glancing over my shoulder, and every time I did, I thought I saw him. Always just out of reach. A figure between the trees. Standing at the bend in the trail, still, watching. Legends came back to me then, things I'd heard as a kid. The hollow-eyed man, an old spirit of the Smokies, said to be a miner who lost his life deep underground, his eyes eaten away by darkness. Some said he was a wanderer from another century, cursed to stalk the mountains forever. Others whispered he was something older than the mountains themselves, a thing that wore the shape of a man, but never was one. And the worst of the stories? That if you let him follow you long enough, if you looked too long into those hollow sockets, you wouldn't make it out of the woods. By the second night, I was broken. Exhaustion clawed at me. I set up camp again, though every cell in my body begged me to keep walking. As soon as the sun went down, the footsteps returned. Louder this time. Closer. My heart hammered in my chest as I sat in the tent, flashlight beam shaking in my trembling hand. Then the breathing started. Right outside the thin nylon wall, deep, ragged, wet breaths. I could hear the exhale, long and drawn out, followed by silence. Then again, closer, I snapped. I unzipped the tent in one motion, shining the light out into the darkness. He was standing there, no more than 10 feet away. The beam caught his face full on, illuminating the pits where his eyes should have been. They didn't reflect the light like normal eyes. They absorbed it, swallowing it whole, leaving nothing but void. His mouth twitched into something like a smile, though it was wrong, stretched too wide, teeth too many. My legs gave out. I fell backward, scrambling, gasping for air. I blinked in blind panic, and once again he was gone. I didn't wait for morning. I packed up in the dark, stumbling down the trail with nothing but my flashlight, running on pure adrenaline. The forest twisted around me, every shadow a threat, every tree hiding that figure. The footsteps never stopped. Sometimes behind me, sometimes ahead, sometimes right beside me when I dared to slow. By the time I staggered out of the trailhead, the sun was rising. The parking lot was empty except for my car, and I collapsed against it, sobbing, shaking. I didn't hike again for months. It's been nearly 2 years now, but I still hear him sometimes. At night, when the house is quiet, I'll hear those same footsteps in the hall. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. And sometimes, when I catch my reflection in the mirror, I swear my eyes look darker than they should, hollow, as though something is waiting to take their place. I left the Smokies behind, but I don't think he ever stopped following me. They told me never to follow strange firelight on Blood Mountain. The locals were clear about that rule. The way old folks get when they've repeated the warning so many times, it's become almost ritual. Don't chase it, don't even look too long. If you do, they said, you'll never come back the same. I didn't listen. My name is Thomas Rayburn. I'm 31, a freelance photographer based in Atlanta, and back in the fall of 2021, I decided to take a solo trip up to Blood Mountain in North Georgia. I'd heard the name growing up. It carries a weight like a bad taste in the mouth. The highest peak on the Appalachian Trail in Georgia, cloaked in pines and fog, it was supposed to be beautiful, haunting, The kind of place a camera could catch moods the eye might miss. I set off late in the day, hoping to catch sunset on the summit. The trail was damp from recent rain, leaves slick under my boots, and the air carried that wet stone and moss smell that always makes me feel small, like the forest has been alive far longer than me. The deeper I went, the quieter it grew. Even the birds hushed. Only the occasional snap of a twig or the distant groan of shifting branches broke the silence. It was after 9 when I decided to stop for the night. I wasn't at the summit yet, but darkness had swallowed the trail, and the fog had rolled in thick and heavy, pale ribbons weaving between the trunks. I pitched my small tent in a clearing and sat down with a protein bar, scribbling notes in my journal about the eerie beauty of the place. My flashlight beam seemed weak against the dark, and I remember thinking how black the shadows felt, like they could swallow light whole. That's when I saw it. A flicker of orange, faint but steady, somewhere deeper in the woods. It looked exactly like a campfire, flames dancing low, casting shadows on the trees. My first thought was relief someone else was out here. Maybe a hiker, maybe a hunter. I wasn't as alone as I thought. I packed my camera and grabbed my flashlight, making my way toward the glow. The forest was hushed, every sound muffled by fog. As I walked, the smell shifted. The damp earth and pine I'd been breathing all day soured into something harsher charred wood, acrid and sharp. And beneath that, another odor crept in, faint but undeniable. Burnt meat. I slowed down, heart thumping. The firelight flickered ahead, just out of reach, as if it were moving deeper the closer I came. My flashlight beam bounced weakly across slick trunks, catching glimpses of twisted branches like outstretched hands. The smell grew stronger, heavier, until it coated the back of my throat. When I finally reached the spot where the fire should have been, there was nothing. No flame, no campers. Just a circle of blackened ground, the dirt scorched as though it had burned hot not long ago. I crouched, pressing my fingers to the soil. It was still warm. That's when I gagged. The smell was thick now, choking. Not just burnt meat, but something worse sweet, cloying, unmistakably human. A sudden snap of wood cracked behind me. I whipped my flashlight around, the beam slicing through fog, but there was only emptiness. My chest tightened, panic rising. I stood quickly, heart pounding in my ears, ready to head back to my tent. But then, just at the edge of the light, I saw movement. A figure? Small, hunched, shifting in the mist. For a moment, I thought it was a person crouched by another fire. But as I stepped closer, the figure seemed to shimmer and fade, like smoke caught in wind. The firelight pulsed again, this time further uphill. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back. But I didn't. I don't know if it was curiosity or something else, something pulling me. I followed. The ground grew steeper, my boots crunching over loose rock. The glow lured me on, a flickering promise in the haze. My breath came ragged, the fog curling into shapes that seemed to twitch and writhe at the edges of vision. Then I stumbled into another clearing. This time, there were remains. Not human, I prayed, though the thought clawed at me. The blackened shapes looked like deer, or maybe wild boar, their bodies twisted and half buried in ash. But the smell, God, the smell was wrong. Too close to flesh I recognized. My stomach lurched, bile burning my throat. The firelight danced again, not ahead, not uphill. Around me, tiny bursts of flame flickered between the trees, circling, multiplying, until the whole clearing pulsed with shifting orange glows. My flashlight sputtered, the beam dimming as though smothered by unseen hands. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, warping into figures that swayed and twisted in the light. And then I heard them. Voices, low at first, murmurs beneath the crackle of phantom fire, then louder, desperate, screaming. Not words I could understand, just agony, raw and endless. It filled the air, pressed against my skull until I clapped my hands to my ears, but still it poured in. I spun, searching for escape, but every direction was the same. Firelight flickering, smoke curling, shadows writhing. My chest heaved, eyes stinging from the acrid air. Through the din, a single voice rose above the rest. A woman's scream, sharp, piercing, so full of pain, it rattled my bones. It cut off suddenly, leaving silence so heavy it felt alive. When my flashlight flared back, I wished it hadn't. There, at the edge of the scorched ground, stood a shape. Tall, thin, draped in rags that fluttered, though there was no wind. Its face was pale, too pale, features melted and distorted, as though burned. 2 black holes stared out where eyes should be, hollow and endless. It raised a hand skin, cracked and charred, and pointed at me. The ground beneath my boots glowed faintly red. Heat surged upward, burning through the soles, smoke curling from the earth. My panic broke loose. I ran. Branches whipped at my arms. Roots snagged my feet, but I didn't stop. The firelight chased me, darting between trees, always just behind, always closing in. The screams rose again, dozens of them, clawing at my back. When I burst into my campsite, my tent was gone. Only scorched earth remained, the grass seared away, the dirt hot under my boots. My chest heaved, lungs clawing for air, thick with smoke. I didn't think. I just ran downhill, faster than I ever thought I could, until the forest thinned and the pale glow of dawn broke through the fog. I made it back to my truck at sunrise, shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. My clothes stank of smoke, my boots still warm, soles warped as though they'd walked through fire. I never told anyone the full story, not even when friends asked why I left my gear behind or why I avoid hiking at night now. They wouldn't believe me. I barely believe it myself. But sometimes, late at night, when I close my eyes, I see it again, the flicker of firelight dancing in the trees, and the pale burned face watching me from the smoke. And I know Blood Mountain isn't done with me. Not yet. I was warned before I went to Harper's Ferry, not by an official guide or even a sign on the trail, but by an old man I met in a diner just outside of town. He leaned across his plate of half-eaten eggs and muttered, "If you see the rocks bleeding, don't touch them. Don't stay too long either. Folks who linger never walk back out the same." His words sounded more like a local ghost story meant to spook tourists, but his cloudy eyes and the way his fork trembled in his hand stayed with me long after I left the diner. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 32 years old, a history teacher from Richmond, Virginia, and I came to Harper's Ferry that October weekend chasing the ghosts of the Civil War. The town is steeped in history: John Brown's raid, Confederate occupations, Union counterattacks, and all the bloodshed that came with it. I wanted to walk those hills myself, to breathe the air where thousands had fought and died, to bring something real back to my students instead of just words from a textbook. I started on the trail late in the afternoon. The October sun hung low, burning a coppery orange over the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers, casting long, jagged shadows across the rocky paths. The air was crisp, filled with the earthy scent of fallen leaves and something faintly metallic, like rust. My boots crunched over gravel, and every sound seemed magnified in the growing quiet. There weren't many hikers around. The ones I passed earlier had been smiling couples or families with dogs, but as the sun began its slow descent, the trail emptied until it felt like I was the only one left. That was when I first noticed the rocks. They jutted out along the path, gray and jagged, but some of them carried a darker shade, as if rain had soaked them through, even though it hadn't rained in days. When I drew closer, I realized the streaks weren't water. They glistened faintly in the fading light, thick and dark red, seeping from tiny cracks in the stone. I crouched down, reaching my hand close, and froze when I smelled it. Copper, iron, the undeniable tang of blood. The warning from the old man came back sharp in my head. If you see the rocks bleeding, don't touch them. My fingers hovered inches from the damp surface before I yanked them back and shoved them into my jacket pocket. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the stones. My rational mind tried to explain it away. Maybe it was iron oxide or some kind of mineral seepage from within the rock. But the smell was too strong, too real. I pressed on, telling myself not to be ridiculous. The farther I went, the worse it got. Rocks along the trail glistened with red. Some only faint streaks, others with rivulets that seemed to trickle downward, leaving stains on the dirt below. I stepped carefully around them, but the metallic smell clung to the air, heavy and suffocating. My chest tightened. My footsteps sounded too loud, echoing against the stone as if the earth itself was listening. Half an hour later, I came to a bend in the trail where the trees opened into a small clearing. That's when I heard it. At first, it was just a low hum, like the wind pushing through a narrow tunnel. Then it sharpened into something else, distant voices, faint but distinct, rising and falling like a chant. I froze, straining to hear. The words weren't clear, but the cadence was unmistakable, like the shouted commands of soldiers on a battlefield. The hair on the back of my neck bristled. I wasn't alone. A cold gust swept through the clearing, and with it came another sound, the sharp crack of musket fire. I spun around, but the trail behind me was empty. No hikers, no reenactors. Nothing but trees swaying in the wind. My pulse hammered in my ears as another gunshot rang out, closer this time, followed by a scream that seemed to tear the air apart. I stumbled backward, my boots scraping against the bloody stones. The scream faded, replaced by ragged breathing my own, and for a moment, silence returned. I wanted to leave, to turn back toward town, but something pulled me forward. Maybe it was my stubbornness as a historian, maybe simple curiosity, but I had to see. I had to know if the stories were true. I continued on, the air thick with the metallic tongue that now clung to my throat. The rocks glistened brighter in the dying light, as if the darkness made them bleed more freely. I felt watched, as though eyes followed me from the tree line, just out of sight. My every step felt heavier, dragging against the earth. Then I saw him. At first, I thought it was another hiker. A man stood up ahead near a cluster of rocks, his back turned to me. He wore a ragged gray coat, the kind I'd seen in museums, and a wide-brimmed slouch hat that shadowed his head. Relief flickered in me. I wasn't alone. I almost called out, but something stopped me. The man wasn't moving, not even shifting his weight or breathing. He just stood there, rigid and unnatural. I took a cautious step closer. The dirt crunched under my boot, and at that sound, the figure slowly turned. The hat slid back as he moved, and my stomach dropped into ice. His face was gone, not mutilated or bloody, just gone. A smooth, featureless expanse where his features should have been, pale and glistening in the twilight. I stumbled backward, my breath caught in my throat, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The figure raised one hand, fingers curled and twitching, as if beckoning me closer. Behind him, the rocks pulsed darker, thick streams running down them like fresh wounds. The metallic scent slammed into me so hard I gagged. The air around him shimmered, bending like heat waves, and in the distortion, I saw flashes of chaos soldiers charging, rifles cracking, bodies crumpling into mud, their blood soaking into the stones. The screams filled my ears again, louder, deafening. I turned and ran. The trail blurred under my feet as branches clawed at my jacket and rocks threatened to trip me. The screams followed, blending with gunfire and the pounding of drums that seemed to shake the ground itself. I didn't dare look back. My lungs burned, the air thick with copper, but I kept going, driven by pure terror. At last, the trees thinned, and I saw the lights of the town below, flickering warm against the encroaching night. My legs gave out halfway down the last stretch, and I collapsed onto the dirt, gasping. When I dared to glance behind me, the trail was empty. No soldiers, no faceless man. The rocks were just rocks, gray and still. I didn't stop moving until I was back at my car, doors locked, hands shaking against the steering wheel. Even then, I couldn't shake the smell. It clung to me, in my clothes, in my hair, in the back of my throat. I drove straight home that night, abandoning my weekend trip. I didn't tell anyone the full truth, not my friends, not my students, not even my family. All I said was that Harper's Ferry was different than I expected. But when I close my eyes, I still see the faceless man turning, the rocks weeping blood, the war replaying itself in the shadows. And sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet, I hear it again. The musket fire, the screams, the chants of soldiers long dead. I don't know if it followed me home, or if the memory itself has teeth, feeding on my fear. The old man in the diner had been right. I should never have lingered. And if you ever find yourself walking the trails of Harper's Ferry and notice the rocks beginning to bleed, don't touch them. Don't stop. Just turn back, because some battles never end. They just wait for someone foolish enough to listen. I should have listened when the old man at the trailhead told me to be off Mount Rogers before sundown. His voice was low, almost conspiratorial, as if he didn't want anyone else to hear. Strange things walk those paths after dark, he said, his pale blue eyes holding mine just long enough to unsettle me. At the time, I laughed it off. I've always been a skeptic. My name's Thomas Green, 36 years old, a history teacher from Roanoke. I had hiked plenty of trails in Virginia before, and Mount Rogers' tallest peak in the state was just another challenge to tick off my list. The day was clear when I set out. The sky stretched a brilliant blue overhead, the air crisp and cool, a scent of damp soil and pine needles sharpened my nose. My boots crunched over gravel and roots as I followed the trail upward. Along the way, I passed patches of wildflowers and heard the distant babble of streams. For hours, it was exactly what I'd wanted: peace, solitude, a break from grading papers, and endless lesson plans. But as the afternoon waned, the forest began to change. Shadows stretched longer between the trees, and the birdsong that had filled the air earlier thinned into silence. By the time I reached the clearing near the summit, the sun was already bleeding into the horizon. I should have turned back right then, but the idea of watching the sunset from Virginia's highest point was too tempting. I sat on a boulder, eating a granola bar, watching the sky ignite with red and orange fire. It was beautiful, breathtaking even. But beauty has a way of masking danger. It started with the sound of footsteps, slow, steady, crunching against the gravel of the trail just beyond the tree line. At first, I thought another hiker had stayed late like me. I raised a hand to wave, but when the figure emerged from the shadows, my breath caught in my throat. He wore clothes that looked decades out of place-worn suspenders over a sweat-stained shirt, trousers patched at the knees, heavy leather boots scuffed and caked with mud. He walked with a tired gait, each step deliberate. But it wasn't his clothing that froze me where I sat. It was his head, or rather, the absence of it. Where his face should have been, there was only a blank emptiness. No features, no flesh, just the suggestion of shoulders rising into nothing. The faint orange glow of sunset burned against the void where his head should be, making it look as if the darkness itself had taken form. I couldn't move. My legs felt nailed to the rock. Every instinct screamed to run, but my body betrayed me. The figure walked past the clearing, not turning, not acknowledging me, just trudging along the trail, as though following a route he had walked 1,000 times before. His boots struck the dirt in a slow, hypnotic rhythm, fading as he continued down the path. For a long moment, I sat in stunned silence, my ears ringing with the sound of my own pulse. Then, just when I thought it was over, I heard the footsteps again. Only this time, they were behind me. I spun around, flashlight clutched tight, beam cutting through the encroaching dusk. Nothing, just trees and shadows. Yet the sound persisted, circling me, always just beyond the reach of light. Crunch, pause, crunch. The noise came from all directions, echoing unnaturally in the stillness. I called out, my voice hoarse. "Who's there?" The forest swallowed my words whole. A chill breeze swept through the pines, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke, old and acrid, like a campfire long extinguished. And then I remembered something I had once read an old legend from this region, about a hiker in the early 1900s who had gone missing on Mount Rogers. Some said he was a logger. Others swore he was a farmer who had lost his way. His body was never found, but locals whispered that his spirit still roamed the trails, endlessly walking, searching for a head he had lost in a logging accident. They called him the Headless Hiker. At the time, it had seemed like nothing more than folklore. But standing there in the half-light, I felt the truth of it pressing against me. I forced myself back onto the trail, flashlight bouncing wildly as I hurried downhill. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig jolted me like an electric shock. My breath came fast, clouding in the cooling air. And still, the footsteps followed, not behind me, not ahead, around me, always circling. At one point, I caught sight of him again, just for an instant. His figure emerged from between the trees, walking parallel to me, his faceless void angled in my direction, though there were no eyes to see. The way he moved, steady, deliberate, was almost worse than if he had lunged. It was as if he knew there was no need to rush, as if he had all the time in the world. I stumbled, nearly twisting my ankle, but I pushed myself on, heart pounding against my ribs. My flashlight flickered, sputtered, then steadied, casting jittering shadows that seemed to mock me. I couldn't tell how long I ran, minutes, hours. Time lost meaning. The trail twisted and turned, but no matter how far I went, the sound of those deliberate footsteps never left me. At last, I burst from the tree line into the parking area, chest heaving. My car stood waiting, a lifeline in the darkness. I yanked the door open, threw myself inside, and locked it with shaking hands. For a moment, the silence was absolute. I dared to believe I had outrun it. But then, faint and steady, I heard it. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The sound of boots on gravel, circling the car. I gripped the steering wheel so hard, my knuckles turned white, eyes darting to every window, expecting to see that faceless void pressed against the glass. But there was nothing. Only the sound, moving around and around until, at last, it faded into nothingness. I drove home that night with every muscle locked in terror, headlights carving a narrow tunnel through the dark. Even when I reached the safety of my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't truly left him behind. It's been weeks since then. I haven't told anyone at work what happened. What would I say? That I saw a man with no head walking the trails of Mount Rogers? That he followed me, step for step, all the way to my car? They'd laugh, or worse, look at me with pity. So I keep it to myself. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet and my neighbors are asleep, I swear I hear it again. The faint crunch of boots against gravel, pacing outside my window, circling. I never look. I can't, because I'm terrified that if I do, I'll see him standing there, still walking, still searching. And this time, he might not pass me by. I was never the type to believe in ghost stories. My name is Daniel Price, 32 years old, a software engineer from Richmond, Virginia. My job kept me locked in a cubicle most days, surrounded by glowing monitors and endless lines of code. By the time summer came around, I craved an escape into the outdoors, a place where the air smelled of pine and soil instead of stale office carpeting. That's what led me to Shenandoah National Park, a vast stretch of wilderness that locals claimed was both breathtaking and haunted. I had hiked there before, but I'd never stayed overnight, never dared to camp deep within its forests. When my coworkers teased me about being a city boy who couldn't handle the dark, I decided to prove them wrong. I chose a secluded site off one of the lesser-traveled trails, far enough from the usual campsites that I wouldn't hear anyone else. That was the appeal. Silence, solitude, just me and the whisper of the wind through the pines. I packed light, just a tent, sleeping bag, a flashlight, some food, and a small camping stove. The hike in was gorgeous. The sun slanted through the trees like golden spears, the air filled with the resinous smell of pine needles baking in the afternoon heat. Birds darted between branches, and for a while, I felt like I had made the right decision. I could already feel the tension of city life dissolving with every step deeper into the forest. But something about Shenandoah felt different that evening. The shadows seemed thicker, clinging to the ground long after the sun dipped behind the ridge. The pines stood tall and unmoving, their trunks crowded close like watchful sentinels. By the time I had set up camp and started a small fire, the world was already sliding into darkness. A hush fell over the woods. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of small animals. Just silence, heavy and expectant. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the woods always quieted at dusk, but there was an edge to that silence that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. It was sometime past midnight when I first heard it. I had been dozing in my tent, the last embers of the fire glowing faintly outside, when a sound threaded its way through the stillness, a whisper, soft, faint, but unmistakable. At first, I thought it was the wind, the way it sometimes whistled through the branches, but then I heard it again, closer, clearer. Daniel, my eyes snapped open. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, every muscle tense. The sound was so distinct, as if someone had leaned right up against the thin fabric of my tent and breathed my name into the darkness. My heart hammered in my chest. I fumbled for my flashlight and flicked it on, sweeping the beam in frantic arcs. Nothing, just trees swaying slightly in the night breeze. The light caught on the sharp outlines of branches, the jagged bark of trunks, but there was no one there. I told myself it must have been a trick of the mind. Maybe I was half asleep, dreaming. Maybe the brain fills silence with nonsense. But as the hours crawled by, the whispers returned. Sometimes faint, just on the edge of hearing, like a rustle of voices overlapping. Sometimes louder, clearer, each one shaping my name with impossible intimacy. Daniel, come closer. The sound came from different directions each time, first behind me, then to my left, then from deep within the woods. I sat in my tent, clutching the flashlight, sweat beading on my forehead despite the cool mountain air. I tried to rationalize. Sound carried strangely in the woods, echoes, owls, trickling water. But deep down I knew what I had heard. By dawn, my nerves were shredded. I stepped out into the pale gray morning, eyes burning from lack of sleep. The forest looked so ordinary in the daylight shafts of sun breaking through the canopy, the ground littered with pine needles. I almost laughed at myself. Maybe exhaustion had played tricks on me. Still, I couldn't shake the way my name had been whispered, each syllable curling into my ear like a cold finger. I spent the day exploring a nearby ridge, trying to distract myself. But everywhere I went, the trees loomed tall and close, their needles hissing softly in the wind. Locals sometimes told stories about Shenandoah, about soldiers from the Civil War whose spirits still wandered the ridges, or settlers who had vanished into the forest centuries ago, their voices carried by the trees. I remembered one particular legend I'd read online, that the pines themselves could hold onto voices, like a record player, replaying words long after the speaker was gone. At the time I had scoffed, but now the memory unsettled me. That night I built a bigger fire, convincing myself that light would drive away whatever had haunted me before. The flames crackled, sparks drifting up into the canopy, but as the hours deepened into night, the whispers returned. This time, I didn't just hear my name. Daniel, stay with us? Daniel, don't leave. The voices layered over each other, dozens of them, overlapping until they were a chorus of hissing whispers threading through the branches. My skin crawled. The firelight seemed dimmer, the shadows stretching longer, darker, as if the forest leaned closer with every word. I shouted into the night, "Who's there?" My voice cracked with fear. The whispers fell silent for a heartbeat, the forest holding its breath. Then, clear and chilling, came a reply. "We are." I swear to God, the pines themselves seemed to tremble as the words slithered through them. The fire sputtered as if choked by unseen hands. My flashlight flickered, the beam weak against the darkness. I stumbled back into my tent, zipped it shut, though I knew it wouldn't keep anything out. All night, the whispers pressed closer, weaving my name into their endless murmur until exhaustion finally dragged me into a fitful sleep. I woke at dawn to silence again, though silence no longer felt like relief. It felt like the pause between heartbeats, waiting for something to return. My hands shook as I packed up camp. I had planned to stay 3 nights, but I couldn't do it. I needed to leave. The forest felt wrong, as if it had sunk invisible claws into me. The hike back should have taken 3 hours, but it felt like I walked in circles. Landmarks I thought I recognized twisted into new shapes. The pines crowded tighter, their trunks indistinguishable from one another. At some point, I realized I couldn't hear my own footsteps anymore, just the faint susurrus of whispers sliding between the trees. "Daniel, don't go." I broke into a run, branches whipping against my arms and face, lungs burning. Panic drove me forward, and somehow, by some miracle, I stumbled onto the main trail again. The moment I stepped out of the dense pines, the whispers faded. The forest looked normal again, harmless, but I could still feel eyes on me, still feel the weight of words etched into my skin. I made it back to my car, hands trembling so badly I could barely fit the keys into the ignition. I drove all the way back to Richmond in silence, not daring to turn on the radio, not daring to hear another voice. It's been weeks since that night in Shenandoah, but I still hear them sometimes, just at the edge of sleep. A faint murmur, curling through the walls of my apartment, slipping under the hum of the air conditioner. Sometimes they say my name. Sometimes they just whisper nonsense, fragments of words, like 1,000 dry leaves rustling together. But the worst is when they fall silent, and I realize the quiet is only waiting. I haven't gone camping again. I don't know if I ever will, because I can't shake the feeling that the forest of Shenandoah isn't finished with me, that somewhere in those endless whispering pines, my name is still being called. And one night, I'm afraid I might answer. They say you shouldn't follow voices on the Blue Ridge trails. The locals will tell you that. They'll lower their voices, glance at the trees like they expect something to be standing there, and they'll warn you plain as day. If you see a child wandering alone, don't go near. No child walks these trails at night, and no child you see is ever really there. My name is Eric Whitfield. I'm 36 years old, a freelance photographer based in Asheville, North Carolina. I make my living shooting landscapes for magazines, travel blogs, and occasionally corporate calendars. That autumn, late October, I'd been hired to capture the foliage along the Blue Ridge Parkway. It's my favorite season here. The ridges explode in reds, oranges, and golds, and the air carries that crisp bite of wood smoke from distant cabins. It's breathtaking. But beautiful places often have dark histories, and the Blue Ridge is no exception. I set out late one afternoon, planning to catch the golden hour before sunset. My gear was heavy on my back, camera bag strapped tight, boots laced snug. The trail was quiet, save for the rhythmic crunch of leaves beneath my soles and the distant call of a crow echoing between ridgelines. The sky was clear, but a fine mist clung to the forest floor, creeping low among the tree trunks like restless smoke. It was on that trail, with the sun bleeding orange through the branches, that I first saw the child. At a bend in the path, maybe 50 yards ahead, a small figure stood. At first, I thought it was a boy 7 or 8 years old wearing pale clothes that hung loosely, like they belonged to another era. His posture was strange, stiff, arms hanging too straight, head tilted slightly to the side, as though he were listening for something in the trees. My first thought was alarm. No kid should be alone up here. I called out, "Hey, you okay, buddy?" My voice broke the stillness, and it felt wrong, too loud, too human against the ancient hush of the forest. The boy didn't move. I picked up my pace, boots crunching faster against the trail, camera straps thumping against my chest. I raised a hand to wave, but just as I did, a curl of fog rolled in, thicker than before, sliding across the path like a living thing. It swallowed him in seconds. When I reached the bend, the trail was empty. No boy. Just swirling mist dissolving into the trees, leaving the air colder than it had been before. I stood there, breathing hard, a prickle running along the back of my neck. Logic kicked in. Kids run fast. Maybe he ducked into the trees. Maybe I just lost sight of him. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't seen someone alive. I pressed on, unease gnawing at the edges of my focus. The woods grew darker, the sun fading quickly behind the ridge, and the mist thickened until it curled around my ankles with every step. My breath plumed white in the air. That metallic tongue of cold filled my nose, mingling with the damp scent of earth and wet leaves. I heard laughter then. Faint, high-pitched, the kind of giggle only a child makes when they're playing hide and seek. My chest tightened. It came from behind me, and when I turned, the trail stretched empty in both directions. The legends floated back into my head, half remembered from stories told at bonfires or in hushed conversations at roadside diners. They say that during the Great Depression, families desperate for food sometimes abandoned their children along the Blue Ridge trails, hoping others would take them in. Many never made it. Some wandered until they froze or starved, their tiny bodies lost to the woods. The mountains remember, the locals say. The children wander still. I told myself I didn't believe it. I'm a man of cameras and light, of things I can capture in a lens and hold in my hands. But that laugh, it rattled something deep inside me. I quickened my pace, telling myself I'd turn back soon. The forest pressed closer, shadows stretching long and sharp, fog thickening until the trail ahead blurred. Then I saw him again. The boy stood farther up the path, closer this time, maybe 20 feet away. His clothes were ragged, threadbare, the pale fabric stained dark around the hem, as if damp. His skin looked ashen, gray in the dim light, and his head was tilted again, listening, waiting. I froze. My heart thundered in my chest, but I couldn't look away. His face was soft, childish, but wrong in a way I couldn't place at first. Too smooth, too pale, as if the blood had drained from him long ago. His lips parted slightly, and I swear I heard a whisper, carried on the fog. "Help me." Instinct overrode reason. I stepped forward, but as soon as I did, the mist curled upward like a curtain, swallowing him whole. By the time I reached the spot, there was nothing. Only cold air that smelled faintly of mildew and something else sour, like old decay. My hands shook as I adjusted my camera strap, though I didn't dare lift it. A part of me wanted to capture him, to prove I wasn't imagining things. But another part whispered that pointing a lens at him would be a mistake, as if acknowledging him too much might make him more real. The woods around me had gone silent. No birds, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Just the whisper of wind through skeletal branches and the slow drip of condensation from the fog. My ears rang with the emptiness of it. I turned back then, deciding I'd had enough. But the trail behind me looked different. The mist had thickened so much I could only see a few feet ahead. My flashlight beam cut through it, revealing only the white swirl of vapor and the occasional glint of wet leaves. That's when I heard footsteps. Light, quick, padding footsteps, like a child running barefoot along the trail. They circled me, darting left, then right, always just out of sight. My throat went dry. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice cracking in the heavy air. No answer, just a faint giggle that trailed off into the fog. I walked faster, then broke into a jog, my boots striking sharp against the dirt. The footsteps followed, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, as if a dozen children ran circles around me. My pulse raced, my breath coming in ragged gasps. At last, through the fog, I saw a shape, the outline of a child, standing at the edge of the trail. I stopped cold. He was closer than ever now, just a few steps away, his wide eyes fixed on mine. And in those eyes, I saw not innocence, not fear, but hunger. I stumbled back, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The fog surged upward again, curling around his form, and as it did, his body seemed to thin, dissolve, until nothing was left but swirling white. The footsteps stopped. The woods were silent again. I don't remember the rest of my run down the trail. Somehow I burst out of the fog near the parking area, lungs burning, sweat freezing against my skin. My car was the only one left, sitting lonely under the dim glow of a lamp. I locked myself inside and sat there shaking, trying to convince myself it was exhaustion, low light, my imagination. But even now, weeks later, I know it wasn't. Because when I got home and unpacked my gear, I found something wedged in the side pocket of my camera bag. A small scrap of fabric, pale, ragged, damp, and smelling faintly of mildew and iron. I burned it that night, but the smell lingered long after the cloth was gone. I still hiked the Blue Ridge, but never at dusk and never alone. And if you ever walk those trails and see a child wandering in the fog, don't follow, don't speak. Just turn back, no matter how much they whisper. Because some children never left these mountains, and they're still waiting for someone to join them. They told me not to go near the caves after sundown. Everyone in Gatlinburg seemed to know that rule, though they never said it outright. It was passed along in hushed tones, dropped like warnings disguised as folklore. If you hear screams in Roaring Fork, don't go toward them. Don't listen too long. And never, under any circumstance, knock back. My name is Daniel Myers. I'm 34 years old, a park ranger stationed in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I've worked here for almost a decade, leading tours, checking trails, and making sure city folks didn't get themselves killed by underestimating the wild. I've dealt with bears, landslides, flash floods, you name it. But nothing ever unsettled me the way the caves of Roaring Fork did. It started in late March, when the days were still cool and the nights dropped into a damp chill that clung to your clothes. My shift ended at dusk, and I often hiked the less traveled trails to clear my head before heading home. That's how I found myself on Roaring Fork Motor Nature Trail after hours. When the road was empty, the trees leaned in close, and the forest floor glistened with patches of lingering snowmelt. I'd heard about the caves from other rangers' old mine shafts carved into the mountainside during the mid-1800s when settlers tried to pull iron and coal from the ridges. Most had collapsed decades ago, buried under tons of rock, sealing miners inside forever. The stories said you could still hear them. Their shouts, their fists pounding the stone, their screams trapped in the earth. I never put much stock in ghost stories. But that night, I learned some places carry memories too loud to fade. The air was still as I walked, heavy with the damp scent of moss and pine needles. My flashlight cut a narrow beam ahead, catching flashes of rock outcroppings and the skeletal silhouettes of trees. That's when I heard it. A faint cry, distant, almost like wind, except it rose and fell in a pitch that carried words I couldn't understand. My chest tightened. I told myself it was water-roaring Fork Creek, often echoed strange noises through the hollows, but the sound was coming from above the trail, where the caves dotted the hillside like dark, gaping mouths. I stood still, listening. Another cry joined the first. Then another, high-pitched, raw, like a man in agony. My stomach twisted, every instinct telling me to walk away. But my job was to keep people safe. And what if someone had gotten trapped? A hiker, maybe, or a kid sneaking around. Against my better judgment, I followed the sound. The closer I got, the stronger the smell hit me. Damp earth, metallic, like rust mixed with something sourer like old sweat soaked into stone. My flashlight swept over jagged rock until it caught the entrance of a cave. The air pouring out was cold enough to sting my nostrils. Then came the pounding. It echoed from deep inside, rhythmic and desperate, like fists hammering against a locked door. The sound rattled my chest. I froze, 1 foot on the cave's threshold, heart hammering harder than the noise inside. The screams rose again, layered, dozens of voices overlapping, twisting together until it was impossible to tell if they were begging, warning, or cursing. I whispered to myself, "It's just air through the rock, just pressure shifts," but the words felt hollow. I called into the cave, "Hello? Is anyone in there?" My voice bounced back in warped fragments. The pounding stopped. The silence that followed was worse. A shiver ran down my spine. Every story I'd heard about these caves came rushing back. Locals claimed miners had been buried alive when the shafts collapsed. Some said they dug with their fingernails until their hands were nothing but bloody stumps, their final screams sealed in stone. Others believed the mountain itself had a hunger, feeding on the terror of those who died inside. I should have left, I know that, but something in the stillness pulled at me. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The air grew heavy, thick with dust, and the faint stench of something old and rotten. My boots crunched against gravel, every sound magnified 100-fold. The beam of my flashlight trembled as I swept it across the walls, revealing claw-like gouges etched into the stone. They were shallow but numerous jagged scratches, leading deeper into the dark. My throat went dry. Then, behind me, came 3 sharp knocks. I spun around, flashlight shaking. Nothing but the empty tunnel, yawning back toward the night. The knocks came again, closer this time, echoing like fists on hollow wood. My stomach dropped. Someone or something was knocking back. I backed away, breathing shallow, the taste of iron thick in the air. And then I saw it. A figure flickered in the beam of my flashlight, half-formed in the darkness. A man in tattered clothes, his face smeared with soot, his eyes wide and glassy. He opened his mouth, and a scream ripped out so loud I thought my eardrums would burst. But it wasn't just his voice. It was hundreds, layered on top of each other, a chorus of pain and rage that shook the walls. I stumbled, fell against the cave wall, and felt dampness soak my hand. When I pulled it back, it was streaked with something dark. At first, I thought it was water. But under the trembling beam of my light, it shone red, fresh, wet. My breath hitched. The rocks weren't damp with condensation, they were bleeding. Panic surged through me. I scrambled toward the entrance, my boots slipping on the wet stone. Behind me, the pounding started again, furious this time, like dozens of fists slamming against the rock in unison. The screams followed, rising into a pitch that made the cave vibrate around me. I don't remember how I got out. One moment I was inside, the next I was stumbling into the cool night air, gasping like I'd been drowning. The forest was silent again, the cave mouth yawning behind me as if it had swallowed everything whole. I didn't report what I'd seen. What could I say? That the rocks bleed? That the dead miners still scream for air? They'd laugh me out of the service. But I know what I heard, what I saw. Even now, weeks later, I can't sleep without hearing it. The pounding, the cries. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I swear I hear 3 faint knocks against my bedroom wall. I tell myself it's the pipes. I tell myself it's nothing. But in my gut, I know the caves weren't finished with me. And if you ever hike Roaring Fork and hear screaming from the caves, take the advice the locals give. Don't listen. Don't look. And for God's sake, don't knock back. I was told, long before I ever set foot on Mount Mitchell, that you never, under any circumstance, look directly into the eyes of the woman in white. Hikers whispered it at the visitor center like it was a joke, an Appalachian campfire tale to scare tourists. But when people say it with that mix of nervous laughter and an edge of seriousness, you know it's more than a joke. It's a warning. And I should have listened. My name is Daniel Cross, 34 years old, freelance photographer. I'd been traveling across the Appalachians for the last 6 months, capturing landscapes for a coffee table book I was putting together. It was late October when I arrived in North Carolina. The trees on the Blue Ridge were lit with fire golden yellows, deep oranges, crimson reds in Mount Mitchell. The highest peak east of the Mississippi had been calling my name for weeks. I had a window of good weather, the kind of crisp autumn day where the air is thin but clear, perfect for shots from the summit. I didn't care about the local legends. Ghost stories don't end up in photography books. I started my hike just after sunrise. The trail was damp from overnight frost, leaves crunching and sticking under my boots. The forest was still, except for the distant cry of a raven that seemed to follow me the higher I climbed. There's a silence in those mountains that feels alive, like the trees are holding their breath. I carried my camera, a pack with water and snacks, and a cheap flashlight I tossed in without thinking. I wish now I'd brought more. It wasn't till I reached the ridge that I saw her. At first, I thought it was just a hiker standing too close to the edge, staring out at the endless folds of mountains and valleys. Her dress was what caught my eye, an old-fashioned, flowing thing too thin for the cold, pure white that looked almost gray in the shadow. She stood perfectly still, her back to me, the wind tugging at her dress and long black hair. "Ma'am?" I called out, my voice catching in the cold air. "It's dangerous there." She didn't move, not an inch. I hesitated, then stepped closer, adjusting my camera strap nervously across my chest. There was something about the way she stood, unnatural, rigid, like a mannequin propped at the cliff's edge. I was maybe 20 feet away when she finally turned her head. That's when I saw her face. Pale as bone, lips colorless, and eyes black, hollow, like someone had scooped them out and left only pits of nothingness. They locked on me, though I swear she wasn't really looking at me. It was like she was staring through me, into something beyond. My chest tightened. My body screamed at me to look away, but I couldn't. I blinked, and she was gone. 1 second she was there. The next the edge of the cliff was empty, only the whisper of wind through pines. I stumbled back, my heart hammering so hard, I thought I'd pass out. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the light, the fog rolling in, exhaustion from the climb. But then I heard it soft, almost too quiet, a woman's breath right at my ear. "You shouldn't have looked." I spun so fast I nearly fell, camera swinging, flashlight rattling in my pack. No one was there. Just trees, rock, mist rising from the valleys. The forest seemed darker than before, though the sun hadn't moved much in the sky. I forced myself to keep walking, faster now, every nerve in my body alert, every sound amplified. The scrape of branches, the distant crack of something moving in the underbrush. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone knew. Something was pacing me, staying just out of sight. By the time I reached the summit, I couldn't bring myself to take a single photo. My hands were trembling too hard to steady the camera, and the thought of lifting the lens to my face, blocking out my vision even for a second, filled me with raw panic. I sat down on the cold stone, trying to steady my breathing, but the air itself felt wrong, heavier, colder. It smelled faintly of iron, like blood. I remembered what one of the rangers had told me in passing, half joking. "Don't linger near the edges on Mitchell. She's been there longer than any of us." I asked him what he meant, and he shrugged. "Folks say she's a bride who leapt, or maybe a woman who froze to death in a blizzard. Some say she was murdered up there. Doesn't matter which story you believe. Everyone agrees she's still waiting." Waiting. That word stuck with me. Waiting for what? The hike back down felt twice as long. The forest closed in, the fog thickened, and shadows moved where they shouldn't have. Every so often I caught a flash of white through the trees, just ahead, just behind, always vanishing when I tried to focus on it. My stomach churned with dread, and my head pounded with a single thought: don't look into her eyes. Don't look again. But near the base of the trail, I made the mistake of glancing to the side, and there she was, standing between two trees, closer than she'd ever been, so pale she almost glowed in the dimming light. Her hair hung limp, wet, like she'd just climbed from a river. Her hands were clasped in front of her, as though in prayer, and her face God. Her face was twisted in something like grief, or hunger, or both. Her mouth opened. No sound came out, but I swear I heard her voice inside my head. A whisper, dry and brittle, like dead leaves scraping against stone. "Stay." I bolted. I don't remember much of the last mile, except the sound of branches snapping behind me, the rush of something keeping pace, and the pounding of my own heart threatening to split me open. When I stumbled into the parking lot, gasping for breath, I collapsed against my car door, fumbling with the keys like a drunk. I didn't stop shaking until I was halfway back to Asheville. That night in the motel, I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, mountain air, a mind too full of ghost stories. I poured a drink, turned on the TV, anything to drown out the silence. But when I finally lay down, I saw her again, not outside, not in the room, but behind my eyelids. Her hollow eyes staring into mine, pulling me back toward that cliff. It's been 3 weeks since I left Mount Mitchell. I haven't touched my camera once. Every night I wake to the same sound, a soft breath at my ear, a whisper just under the edge of hearing. Stay? I don't know how much longer I can resist. I'm afraid if I go back, I won't come down again. And yet, part of me feels her waiting still, patient, at the edge of the highest peak in the Appalachians, watching, calling, and I know, deep down, that I already looked too long. They say you should never cross the old wooden bridge on Hollow Creek Trail at midnight. Not unless you want to hear it, the rope tightening, the strangled gasps, the last desperate kicks of someone dangling in the dark. Folks in Loudoun County talk about it in hushed tones, like the bridge itself can hear you when you speak of it. I never believed it, until the night I crossed it myself. My name's Daniel Carter, 34 years old. I work as a surveyor, mostly dealing with back roads and land plots for the county. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills. I spend a lot of time out in the woods, and over the years I've heard every local legend you can imagine: phantom lights, witch graves, hidden Civil War tunnels. Most of it is nonsense told around campfires. Or so I thought. It was October of 2022, a few days before Halloween. I'd been hired to mark some boundaries along Hollow Creek Trail, a quiet stretch of forest land in Loudoun County. By the time I wrapped up, dusk was settling in, the trees silhouetted against a bruised purple sky. I could have taken the long way back to my truck, but I was tired, and the bridge was the fastest way across the ravine. That's when I remembered the warnings. The old-timers said the bridge was cursed, haunted by the spirit of a man hanged there long ago. Some said he was a deserter from the Civil War, caught and strung up by his own. Others claimed he was just a thief, punished by angry townsfolk. A few whispered it was darker than that: lynchings, secret killings, things people tried to scrub from the history books. Whatever the truth was, the story stayed the same. Cross at midnight, and you'll hear him die all over again. I checked my watch. 11:47. The bridge wasn't far. If I hurried, I could be across before midnight. My boots crunched through damp leaves, the air sharp with the smell of wet earth and wood smoke drifting from some distant farmhouse. An owl called once, then fell silent, leaving the woods unnervingly still. When the bridge came into view, my steps faltered. It wasn't much to look at: a narrow wooden span, maybe 20 feet long, stretched over a black gash in the earth where the creek ran below. The planks were weathered gray, warped and soft with rot in places. A single rail lined each side, more decorative than functional. The whole thing groaned in the breeze, as if it had grown tired of holding itself together. I tightened my pack straps and pressed on, telling myself it was just a bridge, just wood and nails. But when my boot hit the first plank, the sound seemed to echo louder than it should have. A hollow knock that carried through the night air. 11:58. Halfway across, I froze. Somewhere close by, I heard the faint creak of rope under tension. Slow, rhythmic, a sound I knew too well from cutting old swings out of trees for my nieces. That groaning twist of hemp under weight. The hairs on my arms rose. I tried to convince myself it was the bridge settling under me. Wood stretches, nails complain, but then came the other sound, the one I can't explain away. A gasp, ragged, desperate, choked. It came from above me. My head snapped up, and for a moment, I swore I saw something swaying in the branches of a tall oak that leaned over the ravine. A dark shape, twisting in the night air. My throat went dry, my heartbeat pounding so hard, I thought it might shake the bridge apart. "Hello," I croaked, though I didn't know why. My voice cracked, thin against the silence. No answer, just another creak, another strangled breath. Midnight. The second my watch struck 12, the air changed. The night pressed down heavier, colder, carrying with it a smell I'll never forget, the stench of sweat and old rope, of mildew and damp cloth. My mouth filled with the metallic tang of blood, though I hadn't bitten my tongue or lip. And then I felt it. A sudden tightening around my neck, invisible but crushing. My lungs seized as though a rope had dropped from nowhere and cinched itself across my throat. I stumbled, clawing at nothing, vision blurring at the edges. The sound of choking wasn't just around me anymore. It was in me, my own ragged gasps joining the phantoms. I tried to move, but my legs buckled. I fell to my knees on the bridge, wood biting into my palms. The creaking above grew louder, more insistent, like a pendulum swinging. Through my swimming vision, I saw him, hanging there, not 10 feet away. A man in tattered clothes, boots caked with mud, his head slumped forward, a rope biting into the flesh of his neck. His face was pale, eyes bulging, tongue swollen and black. He kicked weakly, the bridge shuddering under each invisible impact. But the worst part, the part that turned my stomach inside out, was that his eyes found mine. Dead, but not empty. They were pleading, begging me to help him. And then the rope snapped. The body dropped with a sickening thud onto the planks beside me. I scrambled back, my spine slamming against the railing. But when I blinked, the bridge was empty. The pressure on my throat vanished. My lungs gulped air so fast I nearly vomited. My hands shook uncontrollably, slick with sweat, though the night air had turned icy. I didn't think. I ran. I sprinted across the rest of the bridge, the boards groaning under my boots, and didn't stop until the trees opened up and I saw the faint glimmer of my truck's headlights through the branches. I collapsed against the driver's side, chest heaving, vision swimming. It was after 1 a.m. when I finally got the courage to drive home. The road was empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed, of something sitting in the back seat, dripping creek water and swaying with every bump. For days after, I tried to rationalize it. Lack of sleep, stress, some trick of sound and shadow. But every night since, I wake up choking. My throat burns raw and tight, as if the rope followed me home. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear it again, the slow creak of rope under weight and the soft, dying gasp of a man I couldn't save. I haven't gone back to Hollow Creek Trail, but I know one day I will. The bridge is waiting. And next time, I don't think I'll make it across.